It is the Halloween season. We're in the spirit of Halloween here. Full steam ahead. I don't know why I'm using train analogies. I really did not have a good opening for this, but I am here with Alex from Podcast Now, who is joining me. Thank you very much for being here today, Alex. I really appreciate having you here.
I loved that opening, Jay, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We are going to be taking a look at 5 horror movies, and I should say 5 horror movie franchises, actually, that could become good modern games. And when I say modern games, the reason I'm saying that is because some of these games on this list some of these horror movies on this list, I'm losing my mind. They will have had games in the past, but not really anything modern. Some of them haven't had any games at all, and some of them have never experienced a game in the last decade. So these are 5 horror movie franchises that can make amazing games.
Number 5.
The first one that we have is definitely Evil Dead. Now, this one's interesting. I'm not talking about the reboot. Please just forget that existed. I know some people are okay with it. I really think it loses a lot of heart and charm of the originals, because I think if you have an Evil Dead game, you do need Bruce Campbell's Ash. I think this needs to be from Ash's point of view. I think you could very much have it be a horror comedy-ish thing, like Evil Dead 2, Evil Dead 3, which was Army of Darkness, and Ash versus the Evil Dead, because you know, in the original Evil Dead movie, Ash goes through so much, and I know some people say, well, they just rewrote it in 2 to be more comedic. But there is sort of a defense mechanism level of this character to the comedy. There is some tragedy underneath. There's a lot of personal loss. And I think you could have almost a Deadpool-style comedy commentary with Ash, while also experiencing a lot of the horrors of what the Evil Dead franchise really is.
So no joke, when you were saying that, as you were saying it, I was thinking, what would be a good game comparison is Deadpool. I thought the exact same thing. I think you're exactly right. And this is, by the way, like Jay was saying, this is an example of a franchise that, Ash has appeared in Dead by Daylight. It was actually a really solid update. A lot of people were very, very excited for it. I think if anything, that kind of shows you right there that like this is something that people would be on board with. Obviously, the franchise is still kind of kicking along. It's obviously had a rough, patch over the last little while, but I think this is absolutely something that would work really well. Like Jay said, comedic. It would be a different, out of all of these, which we'll obviously get to, this would be a very different kind of horror game that I do think has a place in the gaming world of today.
Yeah, I really would love to see that. I do hope that someday we can. Bruce Campbell, even though he is pretty much retired from Ash, has stayed, it seems, open to doing voice work. So it would be really amazing to see that at some point.
Number 4.
The next game that we have, though, for number 4 is actually Nightmare on Elm Street. Now, Nightmare on Elm Street did get a game a long time ago, an entry. The thing is, though, nobody remembers it. Nightmare on Elm Street has a lot of potential. This could very easily be an amazing single-player game. I don't personally think this would work that great as a horror game. A horror multiplayer game. You could go in that direction, I guess, if you really wanted to, but I think it would just come off as a clone of horror games we've already seen. But with something like a single-player experience, if you were a person sort of trying to avoid Freddy going through these dream-like horrors, there's a lot there that you could do with set pieces, with creativity. I mean, that's one of the best things that Nightmare did as a franchise, was creativity of kills, creativity of scares, because it was all sort of in the dreamscape, in someone's mind. It's an alternate dimension. Anything's possible here. Freddy can subject you to any horror he wants to. And I don't know, there's so much potential there that I really think it's too bad we're not seeing realized yet.
Yeah, when I think of film, when I think of really anything of like what terrifies me the most, it really I think the brilliance, like you said, of Freddy and of Nightmare on Elm Street is dreaming. Because dreaming, you go to sleep and that's when you kind of feel the most safe, right? You're in your room and all that stuff, and it just feels nice. And then to be subject to what Freddy does, that would be an incredible kind of psychological thing. Because then you also have the elements, even what they were playing with the first couple movies, of like, well, you got to keep yourself awake, right? Everybody's got to stay awake. So that can lead to some interesting things. And I think, yeah, you're right. Single player is really the way to go. If you do multiplayer, you end up doing Dead by Daylight, which honestly you would end up doing for a lot of these movies turned games. I think it would work the best with single player. You'd have connections with, and you can even think about it like that. You can build relationships with characters, and then they will probably be killed off by Freddy, right, at some point in the game. So that would be really cool. And then, like Jay said, level design, all of the kind of just mental twists you could pull. I think it would be, again, very, very, very different from Evil Dead, and honestly very different from pretty much any. That's kind of what, again, makes Nightmare on Elm Street so special. Pretty much different from any other horror movie and horror movie turned game I think that you can think of.
Yeah, it will, and it's interesting because as you said that too about building relationships, I also thought about something we talked about in a video on your channel, which is Until Dawn. You could sort of go that route with a single player experience too, where you have survivors and people, and maybe decisions you make lead to who comes out alive. Maybe nobody does, maybe most people do, and Freddy is sort of this alien isolation-y character stalking you through the dreams and subjecting you to these visual horror pieces. There's a lot there.
That's actually insanely amazing. Now I need that.
Number 3.
The next one we have at number 3 is actually Halloween. This is a very interesting one because I'm noticing I say interesting a lot, which somebody stop me. I don't know why I keep doing this. Maybe I'm just running out of words, but Halloween could do a lot that we haven't seen. I think that there are some very creative kills in the Halloween movies. I think Michael Myers is a fantastic antagonist. His not speaking and you not being able to see fully his motivations actually really helps that character where it would hurt some others. He's a very iconic horror villain. It's odd that we don't see modern day entries in this, especially with how big the movies are, because the movies have come back. They did a new timeline which followed the original movie. It was about 40 years later and started up there with Michael in a mental institution and breaking out and sort of doing his thing again. I think that you have to be careful with this one though, because like we said, I think you could do both single player and multiplayer. The issue with multiplayer is that I think you'd almost have to go a Dead by Daylight or Friday the 13th route, which could be really fun for people who are fans of this franchise. I just think it would need to be fully realized, because while Dead by Daylight's done a better job, Friday the 13th really struggled. It had a lot of issues, which is something we've talked about as well. And I don't really know how you fix those things other than throwing a ton more money at it. I think that if you went that route of multiplayer, this would need to be a AAA studio handling this IP and really putting money and time into it. But I think for single player, you could do something similar where you are trying to get away from Michael throughout the town being stalked. While it would be fun to play as Michael in single player, I think it would very quickly just become the same thing over and over again. So I think you almost have to play that from the standpoint of a victim.
Right. No, totally. If it's single player, I think you got to be somebody he's chasing after. And like you said, that's it. I think there's a lot of potential, even what we just talked about with Nightmare on Elm Street, having a choice-based thing, having multiple characters, having maybe you have a connection with Michael, and maybe that's the reason. That would be a pretty cool thing, and you'd be able to really illustrate like a town. You'd really be able to, I think, flesh out like a little area. You don't want to go too. You don't want to make this like he's chasing you cross country, right? It needs to all be very, very centered. I think it would work. I think it would honestly work as a single player very, very well. And then like Jay said, yeah, multiplayer, there's no, I think out of even all of these, maybe another one that we're about to say, so I don't want to spoil it. But for this, I think it would be so close to Friday the 13th, it wouldn't even be funny. And keeping with the funny part, they would. I mean, this would be something that they do. In fact, what Jay was just saying, why haven't they made a game when the movies, we had the first one and now we're going to have the next two over the next couple years. Friday the 13th came out May of 2017. We had Predator came out in April 2020. So every 3 years, that studio, comes out 2023. It would actually work really well if they did do a Halloween game to kind of capitalize on that stuff. So I'm not putting that out there at all. But honestly, I could see Halloween is a very grabbing project. I think out of all of these, honestly, Halloween would be the one to be made. I just feel like, and probably a multiplayer.
Absolutely, yeah. I really hope that we do see Halloween eventually because Michael is just so interesting. But for now, we're at least getting good movies for once in a long, long time in that franchise.
Number 2.
So At number 2, we actually have Scream. I think you have more experience with Scream than I do, but I do think that there's a lot of elements here that you could bring in from different games. And while you don't want to just rip off another studio, I was thinking something like elements of Among Us would work very well here, because the Scream killer, the identity changes over time depending on, what movie or show or whatever we're talking about. So you could really do something like that where maybe instead of, if you went multiplayer route, maybe you could turn Among Us and Friday the 13th and Predator Hunting Grounds and kind of smash them all together in a way, and you have everybody's a survivor, but one survivor is killing other survivors in different ways. That would be really cool. Now, it would be really funny if you could just whip out the Ghostface costume immediately, like with a button press, and then kill them, because everybody's going to want to wear the Ghostface costume. But still, or maybe even other than that, maybe Ghostface, maybe that costume is just a cosmetic item, so you can play as Ghostface if you want, but you might be a survivor, so you never know who the real Ghostface is.
Man, so this is a franchise. So this is my favorite horror franchise. I demanded. I told Jay, so I'm not being in this video unless Scream's in it. Scream is my favorite horror franchise. It's also one of my favorite movie franchises, and it's because it's smart. In my mind, it's not even purely scary. In fact, I don't even really think it's scary at all. I was scared of it as a kid growing up, but then once I actually watched them, I was like, oh, they're not really scary. They're smart. Wes Craven is and obviously, actually, Wes Craven's all over this list already, right? Very, very smart guy. I think this would work, like Jay said. I mean, it could work single player, to be quite honest with you, but multiplayer, yeah, making actually exactly what Jay said, using Among Us as your core, basically, or like a mafia like a werewolf kind of game where you're able to talk. I mean, this would be, I would argue, the most sophisticated of these games, because you'd have to build a game that could run like Dead by Daylight, Friday the 13th, our created Halloween game, or Nightmare on Elm Street. It'd have to run like that, but then you'd have to have the extra dimension where it's like there's some conversations, because the biggest part of Scream is the figuring out who's after Sydney this time, right? Or is there more than one, or do they switch off, or whatever's going on. That's a very crucial, that is literally what makes Scream. You could also argue Sydney, Neve Campbell's character, is also what makes the movies the movie, so that would actually be maybe a small issue there. But yeah, this game, I would say, is a really nice blend of a negotiation game where you're trying to figure out, and you're like, just like you can get into some pretty good fights there. In terms of verbally, in terms of actually, speaking. And then from a gameplay perspective, yeah, basically you speed up. I would say Friday the 13th, something like that. Speed it up, maybe shrink it a little bit, and then have the survivors, or have her Ghostface's attacking. They were able to kind of counter him, right? Because they've always been pretty unable. Sydney is pretty able in the movies. I think, I could talk about this for 10 hours. I don't want to make Jay's video too long, but this is the one, obviously, if you guys can tell, I'm most passionate about.
Number one. It's number one.
And at number 1, that is the Conjuring franchise. I think you need to be really careful with this one. And the reason that I say that is because I think the Conjuring franchise as a movie franchise, 1 and 2 are fantastic. They're amazing movies, both of them. They're some of the best horror movies, I think, in decades. However, the spin-offs are mediocre to sucky. Like, The Nun is horrible. La Llorona is really mediocre. It's just not a good movie. Annabelle 1 is really blah, and it discards the story of the original story that was posted online surrounding the doll. Annabelle 2 is just totally out of left field and made up. And then Annabelle 3 is sort of a weird mixture of a haunted house and the Conjuring movies. And so why am I bringing that up? It's because the Conjuring franchise, as much as I love that universe, has been very sloppy. I think that if you make this into a game, it would need to be single player. I don't think it could be sloppy. It would have to essentially be PT-ish. You would have to be dealing with these different entities. You would have to have very few ways to defend yourself, but you would have to make it beatable in a way over the course of a storyline. I also think that it's weird because you'd probably have to be intentional about the direction you go with this, because a lot of the Conjuring stuff is very Roman Catholic based, and I'm not saying you just dump that, but I think that you'd need to find a way to work those elements into the game and story without being preachy and annoying, while also keeping it scary and interesting and true to the source material too. You don't want to dump those things, because that is a big part of the Conjuring, is the exorcisms and the church and all that stuff that's going on, but you don't want to shove it so far down the player's throat that they're like, oh, yikes, okay, I'm out. You know, this is a touchy one that I think could be a fantastic 10 out of 10. We're talking Silent Hill level horror, but it could also be the biggest flop you've ever seen.
Right. No, I agree. You know, so I had to come clean with Jay before we recorded this. I got to come clean with you guys too. So I haven't watched the Conjuring movie from start to finish. I know I need to fix that. At the same time, remember, I am a big baby with horror films, and so maybe that'll never happen. But I do know that this is obviously a really, really big franchise, and I agree with Jay. I mean, I've never watched any of them from start to finish, but I've kind of followed what they've done. And yeah, the core Conjuring films are very, very good. They're very, very loved. And then you have every single spin-off, which definitely tries to expand it, but didn't really do the greatest job. So I agree. Game back to basics, very, very kind of simple. I would even say simplified, but I don't want to maybe necessarily make that like exact, because yeah, like Jay said, you have to have all these different elements that you played around with in the movies in the game. But yeah, I think if you look through this list, well, firstly, it's incredibly diverse. Jay, we didn't go through like a diversity class, but this is a very diverse list. And The Conjuring, while I actually am probably least into Conjuring of all of them, this, I completely agree with you. This could be the best. Like if we had our ideas, come to life, this could easily be the best one. You were saying, actually, well, let me say this. I think this really screams Outlast to me. I don't know if that's correct, again, because I haven't seen any of the movies, but it screams Outlast. That I think those are the kind of themes, the kind of way that you would do it. Although Outlast, and yeah, I wouldn't say that, because Outlast, you don't really fight. It's normally running away. You said PT. I think that makes a lot of sense too. So if you try to combine PT, Silent Hills, what it was going to become, and you combine, the Outlast games, I think you can make a pretty darn solid game here.
Yeah, I think it could be absolutely incredible with the set pieces and the hallucinations and the spiritual entities and stuff like that. There's so many different pieces of lore that are interesting, and there's a lot of different directions that you could take this final entry in the list. Hopefully we see all of these at some point in some way. My fingers are crossed. I'm not holding my breath, but my fingers are crossed that we will see at least a couple of these. And like you said, if we don't, we've got the developers of Friday the 13th that'll come in.
Yeah, we got it covered. They'll make it all okay. Don't worry.
So, hey, Alex, thank you very much for being here. I do want to point out as well, I don't think I said it at the very beginning of the video, but I do want people to check out your channel, Podcast Now. You also have a secondary channel. You have a lot of stuff going on over there, a huge variety of content that I find very interesting, that I think, here's going to be my little personal Freudian slip gripe, that I think YouTube does not do a good enough job of circulating around, because I think you deserve a bigger following than you have. So I hope that people from my channel check you out, because you're always fun to work with. You're really great. You're one of the reasons that I keep trucking on YouTube and having a fun time working with people like you. So thank you very much for being here. And I really look forward to having you back on the channel soon, actually.
Thanks a ton, man. I really do. I get super, super pumped whenever we're going to record. I think we make some really, but they're not normally the biggest viewed videos, but I think honestly, we have a lot of fun coming up with these, and I think these videos are pretty darn solid. Very, very different kind of stuff than maybe even what you and I normally do with each other. So yeah, thanks a ton for having me. You're an awesome creator. I've always said I've followed you since the beginning, and big things in store for both of us.
Hey, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Like I said, everybody, check out Podcast Now. Great content over there. There's all the links are in the description below, as always, for things to support this channel, which I really do appreciate, with interacting in the comments. We've got things like the Patreon, Twitter, Reddit, Instagram. It's all down there at Discord. I hope to see you on the other platforms. Have a fantastic day. And as always, stay shway. And actually, I'm going to change this time. Stay spooky. Huh? There you go.